The first battle is silent. The alarm rings, but the real wake-up happens inside. Before the noise, before the screens, before the world starts pulling. This is the first moment, the first fight, and most people lose it without even noticing. They grab their phone, they chase the day, they give their peace away before they've even stood up. The Stoics knew better. They knew that mornings aren't for catching up, they're for coming back. Back to center, back to direction, back to what matters before the world decides for you. This video is not about motivation, it's about movement. Still, sharp, anchored. 5 things. No noise, no hype, just presence. Let's begin. It's just a joke. You're too sensitive, don't take everything so personally. These aren't harmless, they're tactics. Subtle ways to shrink your confidence, to make you second-guess what you feel, to train you to accept less and call it normal. Because once they can frame your reaction as the problem, they don't have to change their behavior. The Stoic sees through it. He doesn't argue. He doesn't explain why it hurt. He just marks the pattern. When words become weapons, disguised as wit, that's not connection, that's manipulation. So he distances, quietly, completely, because peace doesn't require explaining yourself, and dignity never begs to be understood. They said they would. They didn't. They promised. They disappeared. Once is human, twice is a message. Because broken promises aren't just about forgetfulness, they're about priority. When someone shows you over and over that their words are cheap, believe it. The Stoic doesn't argue, doesn't chase apologies, he watches. Because if they only show up when it's convenient, that's not loyalty, that's access. And access should be earned, not assumed. So he sets a quiet boundary. No more chances where effort isn't real. The world will keep breaking its word, but your peace should not break with it. You give, they take, you show up, they expect it, but never return it. This isn't imbalance, it's a system. A quiet agreement, where your effort is constant and theirs is conditional. But the Stoic doesn't confuse history with equity. He doesn't stay loyal to a drain, because real connection is mutual. It flows both ways, even in silence. So when the giving feels one-sided, he doesn't complain. He simply closes the loop, not with anger, with clarity. Because energy isn't infinite, and no one is worth the slow erosion of self-respect. He doesn't keep pouring into someone who's not holding a cup. You speak, they nod, but they're not listening. You express, they dismiss. You're overthinking, you're too emotional. This isn't support, it's erasure, not loud but steady. The slow message that your feelings aren't valid, aren't welcome, aren't real. And soon, you start shrinking, holding back, swallowing emotion. So you don't seem like a burden. But the Stoic doesn't trade honesty for harmony. He doesn't silence himself to stay acceptable. He watches. And when someone shows no room for truth, he stops knocking. Because real presence holds space. It doesn't judge what it can't handle. So the Stoic withdraws, not in silence, but in self-respect. He saves his voice for places that can hear it. They don't raise their voice. They raise your doubt. A guilt trip here, a silent treatment there. Praise when you comply, distance when you don't. This isn't love, it's leverage. A quiet game where your emotions become tools they can use. And if you're not careful, you'll adjust yourself to keep them calm. You'll betray yourself to avoid their withdrawal. But the Stoic sees the pattern. He doesn't beg for approval. He doesn't chase validation. He observes. If love requires bending out of shape, it's not love, it's control. So he stops playing. He stops explaining. He stops feeding the cycle. Because clarity isn't found in reaction. It's found in removal. And the moment you stop dancing around someone's moods, you reclaim your balance. They're around when it's fun, when it's light, when you're easy to be around, but the moment things get heavy, they vanish. No check-in, no space held, just silence. This isn't busyness, it's a choice. Because real support isn't seasonal. It's not based on your energy level or how convenient you are. The Stoic sees it, and instead of begging, he adjusts, He stops sharing depth with people who only show up for highlights. He stops inviting absence into his most vulnerable rooms. Because the people who disappear when you need them were never holding you. They were holding the version of you that didn't ask for much. And when you finally did, they folded. So he moves on, not bitter, just done. Because true connection doesn't fear your darkness. It meets you there. You share a win. They share a bigger one. You open up. They shift the spotlight. It's not celebration, it's a contest. Because some people don't relate. They compete. Not to harm you directly, but to stay above you quietly. The Stoic doesn't engage. He doesn't shrink to keep others comfortable. He doesn't play games with people who keep score. He watches the pattern. Every conversation becomes comparison. Every success becomes tension. And he knows this isn't connection. It's a silent war masquerading as friendship. So he steps back, not in anger, in clarity, because real ones don't see your growth as a threat. They see it as a mirror of what's possible. He stops proving, he stops performing, because power isn't being above someone, it's being beyond the game. They loved your light, but disappeared in your dark. When you smiled, they stayed. When you struggled, they scattered. That's not bad timing. It's truth. Because anyone can stay when it's easy, but only the real ones stand still. When things fall apart, the Stoic sees absence as an answer. He doesn't chase people who run from depth. He doesn't mask his pain to keep company. He learns support isn't loud, but it's present. And presence doesn't vanish when you get quiet. So he remembers who was there when there was nothing to gain, no image to polish, no high to share. And the rest, he lets them go, without noise, without drama. Because those who vanish when you break were never built to carry your weight. You give, they take, you reach out, they respond when it suits them. You remember everything, they forget the basics. This isn't imbalance. It's a pattern. And once it becomes familiar, you start lowering the bar. You start praising crumbs because it's all they ever give. The Stoic doesn't confuse effort with obligation. He doesn't keep showing up where his presence is used, not valued. So he stops pouring into emptiness. He stops initiating what isn't returned. Not as punishment, but as protection. Because love, like energy, should circulate. And when it doesn't, when you're the only one lifting, caring, remembering, it's no longer connection, it's erosion. So he lets go, quietly, completely. Because one-sided loyalty is just self-abandonment in disguise. It didn't come loud, it came with a smile, a nod, a moment of trust, followed by a cut. Betrayal isn't always an action. Sometimes it's a silence, when they knew better, when they knew you, and still walked the other way. That's what hurts. Not the event, but the intention. Because they had access to your story, to your softness, to places most never reach. And they used it. The Stoic doesn't harden, but he does sharpen. He doesn't close off, but he closes around the truth. If they could betray you once, they will again. So he stops offering his depth to shallow hands. He stops inviting presence. That was only there for the high, not bitter, just awake. Because the deepest cuts come from the ones you handed the blade. They're not gone. They're just not there. When it matters, you need support, they're busy. You fall silent, they don't notice. But when they want something, they show up, instantly. Warm, present, responsive. This isn't presence, it's tactic. A way to stay close enough to keep you engaged, but far enough to avoid responsibility. The Stoic doesn't beg for space in someone's convenience. He tracks patterns, not promises. Because when someone's effort is timed to their comfort, that's not connection, that's control. So he stops answering every message. He stops rewarding the cycle. Not with spite, but with silence. Because energy is expensive. And those who only show up when it benefits them don't deserve access to your peace. They question your no, your distance, your change. So you explain, and explain again, until your boundary starts to sound like an apology. But the Stoic doesn't perform clarity for those committed to misunderstanding. He knows people who truly respect you don't need a paragraph. And people who don't will never accept the one you give. So he stops over speaking. He chooses stillness over defense, direction over debate, because peace doesn't require permission, and self-worth doesn't beg to be approved. He walks away, not because he owes no one an answer, but because he owes space to stand without shrinking. They don't control with rules. They control with connection, with what they know, with what you told them, with what you felt when you were unguarded. They use it, subtly, sharply. One soft moment turned into a weapon. One past confession thrown back as leverage. The Stoic remembers, vulnerability is not a mistake, but it is a responsibility. Because not everyone who listens with warmth holds your trust with care. Some people hold your truth to manage you, shape you, keep you small by reminding you of when you were weak. So he learns, not everyone gets access to the deepest version of him, not out of fear, but out of discipline. Because intimacy is sacred, and sacred things aren't shared with those who can't carry silence. They hurt you, then make it about how hurt they are. They cross the line, then cry when you draw one. This isn't sadness, it's a strategy, because if they can become the victim, they don't have to be accountable. If they can flip the focus, you'll spend your energy explaining instead of protecting. The Stoic doesn't fall for performance. He doesn't comfort someone while bleeding from what they caused. He sees the move, the inversion, the spotlight shift. And instead of arguing, he steps out of the story. Completely. Because when someone always plays the victim, they never grow, they never change. And you become a character in their script of self-pity. So the Stoic cuts the scene, with silence, with space, with the truth. Real healing doesn't need an audience, but real damage doesn't deserve a stage. It didn't happen, but you remember it. You felt hurt, but they say you're imagining things. You're too sensitive, too dramatic, making a big deal out of nothing. This isn't confusion, it's gaslighting. A slow erosion of reality until you start doubting your own memory, your own instinct, your own self. But the Stoic holds the line. He doesn't trade his truth for someone else's comfort. He knows when someone repeatedly shifts the narrative, it's not a misunderstanding, it's a method. So he stops explaining, stops questioning his clarity, starts writing things down, starts trusting the facts, not the feelings they try to assign him. And when he sees the pattern, he doesn't fix it. He exits. You don't need to fight every shadow. You just need to guard your light. Because manipulation only works when it finds an open door. And most doors aren't physical. They're emotional. Left ajar by old wounds, soft spots, unseen doubts. But the Stoic watches, not with paranoia, with clarity. He closes what needs closing. He filters what enters. He doesn't harden, but he sharpens. Because protection isn't about being cold, it's about being clear. Clear about what's allowed, what's welcome, and what crosses the line. You don't need to explain that. You just need to embody it. They'll feel the shift, they'll sense the line. And when they try to twist the story again, you won't flinch, because your peace no longer negotiates. You don't fight to be respected. You just stop staying where it isn't possible, because your mind is not a playground, and your perception is not a weakness. He protects it, like peace, like breath, like life.